Last year, I wrote an entire book and it didn't turn out the way I was hoping. So back in 2019, my second book came out, Snake Island, and it got some pretty good reviews, and I went around Australia touring it and did a few things here and there. But as that sort of settled down, I started to think about my next project. And I'd been toying with this idea for a while. I wanted to set a book back in colonial Australia, back in the frontier of Ballarat and the goldfields. And I wanted to set this kind of morality tale back then. I wanted to investigate the impact white people have had on the Aboriginal people of Australia in novel form. I wanted to do that as a white man, and I wanted to sit there with that uncomfortable question for a while. And so I was writing that book, and I got about 25,000, 30,000 words in, and it became apparent to me that I didn't get writer's block, but I did feel a sense of, I just don't think I'm quite ready to do this yet. I don't think I've read enough, I don't think I've thought enough, and I just didn't feel like my craft skills were there yet to actually finish the book. So I ended up putting it aside and just sitting there. And at that stage, I had no idea whether or not I'd ever return to it or whether it would just sit there as a bit of an exercise. Who knows? And it was at that point that I really started to invest my time and energy into training to go to Mount Everest Base Camp, which I will be making a video on that trip. That will be coming up, I promise. But needless to say, beautiful countryside. The actual trip itself was amazing, and I can't believe I actually got to do that in my lifetime. I actually got to go and see Mount Everest in person. It was a very long trek though, and climbing up at that altitude for hours upon hours every single day, just going at an absolute snail's pace because of lack of oxygen in the air, just breathing so hard. The way that I always tend to be able to focus and push through those arduous sort of moments in my life is I always end up creating in my head. And so I started to work on a new book. If you're up at that altitude, the ink in the pen actually freezes, so you can't use pens up there. So by the yak poo fire every night, after we played around a dumble with cards with our guide and things like that, I would sit down and I'd start to map out what I'd created that day in my head. And I had this idea. I wanted to write this action-packed blockbuster. I wanted to write an action film in book form. And the reason I wanted to do that was because I love action films. I love action cinema. I love epic shootouts. I love lots of big cast of characters. And so that's what this book slowly became. I had all these characters sort of intermingling, and I had all these conflicts, and I really started to map out how each of the characters would work and how the plot would work and the main character. And I had so much fun. And it really did take a lot of my mind off just the grind of one foot in front of the other going up to Mount Everest. So when I returned from doing that, we went back into quarantine for 2 weeks because we just managed to fly in out of Nepal. I'm very grateful I didn't actually get stuck outside of Australia. Can you imagine? And then we were for 2 weeks in addition to that, and then further weeks in actual lockdown. I live in Queensland, Australia. As far as Australia is concerned, we've had kind of the least amount of lockdowns, I think, out of nearly any state. But at the same time, that first little push, it was a good 6 to 8 weeks where we were locked down. And so while I was locked down, I dedicated myself to actually creating this book. And I had an absolute blast. I tweeted about my word count every day. It gave myself a real sense of routine. And I actually outsourced some of the action scenes. I had an action scene on a playground, and I sort of got people on Twitter at Ben Lee Hobson, Leigh, if you're interested in following me. And I loved it. I loved creating it. I had so much fun. And whereas that other book was so challenging and thoughtful, and I had to think about everything 50 times, this book was just came out. It was just an absolute breath of fresh air. It was an absolute relief. So I finished the book, and I sent it out to some readers. So I have some people who I trust dearly, their opinions. And I sent it out to them and I waited for feedback. I got feedback. I incorporated that feedback. I made changes to the novel. I sent it to my agent, Gabby, who works for, is part of Left Bank Literary. And she's been with me since day dot, and we sort of brainstormed some ideas, and she helped develop a few things here and there, helped develop the title. And, you know, I did the hard yards. Like, I really worked my absolute butt off to get this book as good as it could possibly be. And eventually we got to the point where she's like, okay, let's send it to our publisher. Then that waiting game happens. And I'm sure those of you who are writers or artists of any form, you know the idea of where you send in something and then you just wait to hear back. That agonizing wait every day, check your inbox and things like that. So that was what happened to me. And months go by, and then eventually I get a call from my agent, and I can tell already just from the way she called me, where she was going to let me know that the publisher actually didn't respond to my book. Now, I think, you know, hopefully I'm understanding when you guys hear that, especially because hopefully you're invested in my journey as a writer. You go, oh, it's unfair. Oh, you know, maybe she didn't understand the book. I want to be completely upfront with this. My publisher is amazing, and I have a great relationship with my publisher. I wonder if you can hear that dog. Come here. Here, this is my dog. You've seen him before on the channel. Look, here he is. Oh, who's a good boy. Go bark at that other dog. So when my publisher says something like she didn't respond to the book, I take her at that. And I know that she passed it around to other people in that publishing house. Allen and Unwin, my publisher, I know she passed it around, and I know there's a few people who actually read it and said, no, this isn't working. This isn't the thing. We don't want to publish this. I think that's a really hard call to make, and I am grateful that that call was made, but it is a devastating thing. Because it's like you've spent years and years perfecting a craft. You know, imagine you build furniture or tables or something like that, and you spend years and years getting good at it to the point where people actually buy your things and review them and like them and have them in their home. And then you come up with a new table design and you show people, and the response is that's not very good. That's kind of what the response is, right? And look, maybe there's a place for that book. In the end, I think I made a table that no one liked, except for me and my early readers. They all seem to like it, although, you know, they might be just really kind as well. So when you're faced with this question, the idea is, what do you do? And I hear a lot of emerging writers say things like, oh, they just don't understand what I'm doing here, or they didn't get this, or, you know, it's sort of sounding like they're blaming the publishers or the people who, you know, run the magazines for rejecting them. Like, they just didn't see my vision. Like, your vision is the most all-encompassing important thing in the world. Sometimes it's in the execution, and sometimes maybe the original idea is not actually very good, or at least appealing to a lot of people. I mean, these books, you've got to appeal to people. People have to read them in some capacity, whether it's intellectual or whether it's emotional, whether it's hopeful, whether it's depressing. Whatever the book is, it has to have a kind of appeal to people, even as an art form. And this book didn't. And you can imagine what that's like. And I'm sure, again, I'm talking to you guys, I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are listening to this and thinking, yes, that's exactly where I've been, in the midst of that rejection, right? And it is hurtful, and it makes you question your ability. It makes you feel ashamed, weirdly. Like, I haven't really talked about it since it happened, and this was last year. Like, I haven't really talked about this openly with anyone yet. I'm only doing this now because I feel okay with it now. Like, it's a bit of removed from me. But yeah, it was a blow. It was an absolute blow to maybe the ego, or it was hard. It was very hard to deal with. But out of the midst of that, I found a new sense of determination to go back to that other project that I'd left behind. And it was with this renewed sense of enthusiasm that I really tackled it. And I thought to myself, you know what, this might be the very last thing you write. This might just be, again, something no one wants. This might be the thing that you might not be supposed to write this. Maybe you don't have enough ability to do this, but you are just going to do it. You're going to do your best, and you are going to sit there with it and just know that you've done something that you're proud of. And that's where I went with that other book, just to pour myself again. Maybe it's distraction, but just to pour myself into a new creative pursuit. So I finished that book, and I went through a very similar process with readers. I went through a similar process. I didn't have as many people read it this time. I kept it much more in-house. I worked really hard, and I went down a lot of different avenues and got a lot of experts to really study it to make sure it was as good as possible. And I'm very happy that this book was something that my publisher responded to. This book's actually going to be coming out next August at this stage. So I will obviously be updating you guys and, making sure I keep everyone up to date as far as where I'm at with it. I'm actually waiting to get some structural edits on that. So some really big notes. But yeah, next year we'll be back into a new book, which is extremely exciting. I'm really excited about it. I can't wait to actually share it with everyone. The thing I wanted to say is I came out of this whole thing, and I always thought this, but this certainly solidified it for me. I actually really now firmly, I don't believe in wasted words. I don't think that book that I labored over, that I spent so many hours working on, now that it's sitting on my desktop and it's just sitting there, and maybe no one in the rest of this life will read it, I don't think that's wasted time. I don't think I wasted those words. I think I improved my craft. I think I found maybe an avenue that, maybe I don't have a strength in. Maybe it's something that I'm not actually suited to do. And that's okay. Again, art is about experimentation, and art is also about, or creativity is about, like to me at least, is throwing a bunch of things at the wall and seeing what sticks. And that book didn't stick. But I learned that it didn't stick, and I learned a lot about my craft and my process, and it certainly made me more determined to keep on pushing into where my strengths are, to go back to that book that I think I was meant to write. Anyway, that's all from me. I'd love to know your thoughts. Have you guys ever been rejected with your writing or with your creativity? Hopefully you got a little bit out of what I've said here, and I'd love for you to leave some comments or hit me up on any of the social medias, links that are wherever they are on YouTube. And I'd also really appreciate if you could share this video with people, especially people who have gone through rejection and things like that with their writing. Hopefully it can be a bit inspiring to them. I'm not saying everyone's story is going to be exactly like mine. I mean, I wrote 4 whole books before I got to Become a Whale, which was my first novel. So I'm no stranger to writing a lot and having a lot of it be uninteresting to people. So we're not all going to have the same story, but I guess the point is, when you have something that doesn't go according to your plan, there tends to be an actual plan. And as long as you keep on pushing, you'll get somewhere in the end. Something at least that you can be proud of.